Good afternoon and welcome everyone. On behalf of Saab and the Atlantic Council Schoolcraft Center for Strategy and Security, I would like to welcome you to yet another high-profile event in our Commander Series. Today, on the topic North Star, the first Air Force Arctic strategy. Today's event is a bit special. Usually the Commander Series welcome one senior military or defense leader, and as you will shortly see, we have three esteemed guests with us today. My name is Michael Anderson. I am an executive at Saab as well as a board director here at the Atlantic Council. When Saab and the Atlantic Council launched this program, our ambition was to establish a flagship speakers forum for senior military and defense leaders to discuss current and future challenges. It has been very useful for defense industry and companies like Saab in order to better understand challenges and priorities in order for us to direct our investments, particularly when it comes to research and development, and how we can better be prepared to meet future military capabilities. An excellent example of this exchange was when then Secretary of the Air Force, Deborah Lee James, came to the Atlantic Council to share the Air Force priorities. The Secretary noted that one of the key priorities was the acquisition of a new Air Force pilot training solution, TX. The Air Force were going to acquire exactly what they had asked for, nothing more, nothing less. And more importantly, the solution had to bend the cost curve. Boeing and Saab decided to jointly invest in this franchise and provided the Air Force exactly what they were asking for, America's trainer. Saab and Boeing are now very excited to execute the EMD phase of the Air Force T-7A Red Hawk program. Last year, when the Commander Series celebrated 10 years, we hosted then Secretary of the Army, Mark Esper, who, as you all know, has moved on to become the Secretary of Defense, then Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staffs, Joseph Dunford, and then Chief of Naval Operations, John Richardson. It was quite a year, but this year already we've hosted several important Army stakeholders, and more recently, we hosted the National Guard Bureau General, Joseph Lengyel, who talked about the important and diverse role of the Guard in the domestic coronavirus response. Today, we are truly honored to have an Air Force dream team with us. Secretary of the Air Force, Barbara Barrett, the Air Force Chief of Staff, General David Goldfin, and the Chief of Space Operations, General John Raymond. Thank you for being here, and we are looking forward to an increasingly important conversation about the national security aspects of the Arctic. With that, it's now my pleasure to introduce my colleague and good friend at the Atlantic Council, Damon Wilson. He will make a couple of announcements and further introduce our esteemed guest for this landmark Commander Series event. Damon Wilson is the Executive Vice President at the Atlantic Council, serving both as a thought leader and a manager with responsibility for strategy and strategic initiatives, program development and integration, and institutional development and organizational effectiveness. His work is committed to advancing a Europe whole, free, and at peace, to include Europe's East, the Western Balkans, and the Black Sea region, to strengthening the NATO alliance, and to fostering a transatlantic partnership capable of tackling global challenges and promoting its common values. From 2007 to 2009, Wilson served as a special assistant to the President and Senior Director for European Affairs at the National Security Council. Previously, Wilson served at the US Embassy in Baghdad as the Executive Secretary and Chief of Staff. Damon completed his master's degree at Princeton University at Woodrow Wilson School for Public and International Affairs and his BA from Duke University. Damon has been decorated by the presidents of Bulgaria, Estonia, Georgia, Hungary, Latvia, and Poland for his efforts to advance transatlantic relations. Over to you, Damon.
Thank you very much, Mike. Let us get on with this program. You said it yourself, the Air Force Dream Team. On behalf of the Atlantic Council, I just want to echo a warm welcome to the incredible audience we have joining us today. Thank you, Mike, for that introduction and for Saab's generous support and longstanding support of our Scowcroft Center's Commander Series. It's been a privilege to host together with you the many senior defense and military leaders you mentioned. I'm also really delighted to be joined not just by one, but by two Atlantic Council board directors to host today's event. Of course, Michael Anderson, but also Paula Dobriansky, who will be moderating the conversation today. But we've got such a large turnout for this discussion because of our guests. we are joined by three of the Department of Defense's most senior leaders, Secretary of the Air Force Barbara Barrett, and two members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General David Goldfein and General John Raymond. Thank you so much for joining us from the Pentagon Live. The Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security is a center that honors General Brent Scowcroft's legacy of service and embodies his ethos of nonpartisan commitment to the cause of security, support for U.S. leadership in conjunction with our allies and partners, and dedication to the mentorship of the next generation of leaders. And we put an emphasis in our work on strategy, particularly now at a time of incredibly dynamic and complex changes that we are living through now. And in that vein, the Scowcroft Center has just released a three-part series, the Atlantic Council Strategy Papers, Shaping the Post-COVID World Together, that really outlines scenarios for a post-pandemic world, and more importantly, a strategy for how the United States, alongside its allies, can catalyze a better outcome from the challenges we face today. Because of this emphasis on strategy, I couldn't be more pleased for today's discussion about strategy, to be joined by our distinguished speakers as they launch the Department of Air Force's first strategy for the Arctic. That's a big deal. Driven by a changing climate and melting ice, as well as technological advances in commerce and defense, the Arctic, of course, has become a key arena of great power competition. Dynamics in the Arctic are shifting with Russia's military buildup and growing capacity for power projection, coupled with aggressive and wide-ranging Chinese pursuit of its perceived strategic interest in the region. More and more, the Arctic is not only a region through which threats to the United States may pass, but a region in which U.S. interests can be directly challenged. So these new dynamics are increasingly apparent, not just for the United States, but for our allies and partners. And that's why earlier this year, the Atlantic Council hosted its inaugural Arctic Security Conference, where we heard from officials from every NATO Arctic ally share their concerns and call for the need to preserve stability in the region. The U.S. Department, with the largest presence in the Arctic, from multiple bases in Alaska to space domain assets in Greenland, the Department of the Air Force has also emphasized the geostrategic importance of the Arctic. The department's role in security and defense in the region is crucial, and it's my privilege to introduce the department's leadership to present the key components of their strategy, which is being released today. Secretary Barbara Barrett was the 25th Secretary of the Air Force, overseeing both the Air Force and Space Force. And she previously served as U.S. Ambassador to Finland, helpful for today's conversation, and has trained as an astronaut. General David Goldfein is the Chief of Staff of the Air Force and a combat pilot with distinguished service over the former Yugoslavia and Iraq. He previously served as Vice Chairman of the Air Force and Director of the Joint Chiefs Staff. And General John Raymond is the very first Chief of Space Operations and concurrent commander of U.S. Space Command. Starting his command as a missileer in the Cold War, he's worked extensively on space, including as the commander of U.S. Air Force Space Command, which formed the nucleus of the new Space Force. And then moderating today's discussion will be Ambassador Paula Dobriansky. Ambassador Dobriansky is a senior fellow at Harvard's Belfer Center, the vice chair of our Scowcroft Center, former Undersecretary of State for Global Affairs. But if you know her, she is a formidable expert in Arctic affairs and environmental security. We'll look forward to having her voice in this. What a terrific group. We're honored to have all of you as guests, eager to hear your views. I'm going to turn it over to Secretary Barrett. I just want to remind everyone in the audience that this is, of course, on the record. Join the conversation using our hashtag #ForwardDefense. And for those of you who are joining us on Zoom, you can go ahead and pose questions to our speakers in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. We'll be monitoring and collecting these and amplify the conversation across our social media platforms. Please identify your name and affiliation with each question you submit. And with that, I'll hand it over to Secretary Barrett to kick us off. Thank you.
Thank you, Damon. Damon, Mike, thanks to you and to Saab for sharing your Atlantic Council Forum for us to unveil the Department of the Air Force's Arctic strategy. Ambassador Dobriansky, as always, your involvement adds intelligence and gravitas to any policy matter, but especially on the Arctic. Thank you for your collaboration on this important geostrategic issue. The Atlantic Council's mission, Shaping the Global Future Together, correlates perfectly with the Defense Department's Arctic objectives of defending the homeland, maintaining favorable balances of power in the Arctic, and keeping common domains free and open. Extrapolating from these objectives, the Department of the Air Force articulates 4 focus areas in our Arctic strategy: vigilance in all domains, projecting power through combat credible forces, cooperating with allies and partners, and preparing for Arctic operations. First, let's set the stage with some background on why U.S. Air and Space Forces need a comprehensive Arctic strategy. Historically, the Arctic, like space, was characterized as a predominantly peaceful domain. This is changing with expanded maritime access, newly discovered resources, and competing sovereign interests. No other country has a permanent military presence above the Arctic Circle comparable to Russia's. Recent Russian investments in the Arctic include a network of offensive air assets and coastal missile systems. The Arctic defines Russia. Almost 25% of Russia's GDP comes from the north of the Arctic Circle, for that matter, mostly from hydrocarbons. Russia's economic reliance on the Arctic may explain its military initiatives in the region. Extended Arctic access promises an uptick in commercial as well as tourist traffic, generating increased potential for rescue operations there. Meanwhile, China is trying to normalize its presence in the Arctic to gain access to regional resources, which are said to include over 90 billion barrels of oil and an estimated $1 trillion worth of rare earth metals. In 2018, China linked its Arctic activities to its One Belt, One Road initiative. Many are concerned that China may repeat what some see as predatory economic behavior to the detriment of the region. Addressing these changes, the Air and Space Forces are elevating the Arctic with their 4 strategic priorities. First, the department is increasing vigilance for both deterrence and defense. Vigilance encompasses everything from weather forecasting and consistent communications to threat detection and tracking. Physical facilities delivering vigilance include advanced systems like the long-range discriminating radar at Clear, Alaska, and the North Warning System stretching from Alaska to Labrador. The Department of the Air Force is enhancing existing defenses and embracing new air and space technologies. Our commitment to collaboration with our Canadian allies remains strong as we reinvigorate aging warning systems that benefit our mutual security. Second, Air and Space Forces prioritize power projection through combat credible forces to deter foreign aggression and, if necessary, defend our country. Bases in Alaska benefit from the region's strategic geography. When the full complement of planned F-35s arrive at Eielson Air Force Base, Alaska's unparalleled concentration of 5th-generation fighters will project unmistakable influence. Third, allies and partners. The United States deeply appreciates its strong defense relationships with 6 of the 7 other Arctic nations. Building upon past collaboration and expanding existing cooperation in the Arctic will continue as our priority. Already, Air and Space Forces are increasing interoperability with allies and partners through everything from military exercises to satellite launches. The department will continue engaging with high North Indigenous peoples whose unique knowledge was acquired through millennia. Finally, Air and Space Forces will prepare for Arctic operations. For example, at Alaska's Jay Park, the Air National Guard and the Air Force Reserves augment specialized exercises and training to prepare for Arctic air and space missions. The Department of the Air Force has a long legacy of recognizing the strategic importance of the Arctic. Long before the need for an Air Force was recognized, Alaska was considered a key to an aviation future. Today, DoD's total Arctic activity and investment, Air and Space Forces are responsible for 79% of all of DoD's investments. In summary, the U.S. Air and Space Forces value the Arctic. Access and stability require cooperation among America's allies and partners, along with a commitment to vigilance, power projection, and preparation. The Arctic should remain a free and open domain for benevolent actors, and it is a critical domain to protect America's homeland. Thank you. Opening statements, anything further? Anything further? We'll go to questions. Paula.
All right. All right. All right. Sorry. All right. Here we go. Sorry. Madam Secretary and Generals, forgive me. There was a little delay in starting on my video. Technology, what can one say? But look, welcome today. Congratulations. First, I really want to start with that. What a groundbreaking strategy. Let me go with a first basic question. You really well laid out, Madam Secretary, the 4 lines of effort: vigilance, power projection, cooperation, and preparation. Why now? Why now is this strategy out? Why is it important? And what are the challenges that you see? You were recently in Alaska. You've also been in the Arctic Circle before. Why now? And what are the core challenges that are before you?
Well, why now? We've always valued the Arctic and recognized its importance, its geostrategic location, the importance of that location. But more recently, we have recognized the aging infrastructure from the Cold War era. Much of that was built at a time when we felt a threat. We've gone through some period of time when we haven't paid as close attention. So aging technology tells us it's time for us to focus there again. Secondly, the Russian buildup has caused us to take our attentions to that area and recognize the importance there. And with new technologies, we really have to be attentive to what the new capabilities are and the geostrategic significance of the Arctic altogether.
All right. And by the way, if the generals won't hesitate in jumping in as they deem appropriate, I am going to ask a few questions that will be directed at them, with your permission, Madam Secretary, as this is a team effort, as I see. Let me go to the question about Russia. Russia has definitively attached great significance to the Arctic. We've seen the building of the Trefoil military base. There have been other bases. What is the Air Force's and DoD's overall threat assessment now of Russia? Could we address that? How do you see the scale and the scope of what Russia is seeking to do in the Arctic?
Chief?
Yeah, thanks, Ambassador. I'll jump in, and I'd be remiss if I didn't start off by saying that we're very proud to claim Brent Scowcroft, of course, as an airman. So it's an honor to be in this, especially in this forum.
So are
militarily,
we. So are we.
Militarily, you know, we always look through the lens as the Secretary laid out. You know, collaborate wherever we can, compete where we must, and then win if we're called upon. And we're seeing increased Russian activity throughout the region for all the reasons that Secretary Barrett laid out. But I'll go back to that collaborate where we can. So one might question why we would allow a Russian fighter aircraft to taxi up well within weapons range with live missiles on board to a large intelligence aircraft with a number of airmen in the back end who are, you know, not able to defend themselves. And why in the world would we allow that to happen? And oh, by the way, Russia allows us to do the same. And we've seen increasing military activity in terms of the number of intercepts that we're seeing with long-range aviation on both sides. And if I were speaking to my Russian counterpart right now, the Chief of Staff of their Air Force, a professional Air Force, by the way, I would tell them that it's in our best interest to ensure that we adhere to common rules of behavior, just as we have for the last 50 years as we've intercepted each other in the Arctic, off the shores of Alaska, off the shores of Russia. What we can't afford is a miscalculation or for one of our airmen to perform below standards. And so as we see increasing activity that is perhaps politically or economically driven, militarily, we have to be able to to have our two professional air forces continue to operate in this area, just like the Secretary talked about. So it's an opportunity we have now with this strategy to determine whether we have areas of common interest where we can collaborate, knowing full well that we are going to continue to compete.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Other comments just on that?
Thanks, Madam Secretary and Chief, and thanks to the Atlantic Council for hosting us today. This is a really, really important strategy for space as well. The Arctic is absolutely key and essential terrain for the space domain. It's where we conduct our forward operations, if you will, to provide that global vigilance. It's clear that as environmental changes have taken place, the strategic environment has changed, and as the Chief laid out, it's getting to be a more congested neighborhood. And we think there's a lot of parallels between the Arctic and space as we look at warfighting domains, and as the Chief talked about, being able to have a common language and being able to talk back and forth. It's vital, absolutely critical terrain for us. We want to deter conflict from occurring both in space and through the Arctic, and we believe that this strategy is absolutely essential to being able to do that and being able to allow us to continue to operate as we have over the past 50 years.
You know, I want to come back to the geopolitics and ask a question about China, but General, if I may, just on the point about space, can you explain a little bit further, dig a little bit deeper as to why the Arctic is so important for your new role?
It absolutely will, and I actually have two roles, as was mentioned today. I'm the Chief of Space Operations, which organizes, trains, and equips the space capabilities to present to myself in my U.S. Space Command hat to then be able to execute space operations. In my U.S. Space Command hat, I'm assigned an AOR that's 100 kilometers above the Earth's surface and higher globally. And so it's a global domain, and it requires global access to be able to operate those capabilities that provide advantage to our nation, to our joint and coalition forces, and to the average American and partner that we have around the world. It is absolutely key terrain. If you look at one of the most critical missions that we do, and that's missile warning, that's the Arctic is our front edge of that mission, and we do that mission both at Thule, Greenland, north of the Arctic Circle, with our space professionals that are assigned there at Thule Air Base. We also do it in Alaska and at Clear Air Force Station, as the Secretary just mentioned. She visited there just a couple weeks ago, and we're really proud of those airmen that are there in very harsh environments, being that front line, being able to protect our nation, provide that global vigilance, if you will. That's one of the core tenets of this strategy. The other thing that we do, if you look at the key terrain aspect of that environment, we also command and control satellites. And if you're going to command and control satellites that are in polar orbits, where better to do it than on top of the world at the pole? And it allows us to get great access to those satellites to be able to command and control and do that business. So the geography and the position on the globe, if you will, makes it an extremely advantageous place to operate from. Although it's not easy to operate from there, and that's one of the other key tenets of this strategy, is being able to prepare. And if you're in an Arctic environment that is dark for half of the year and very cold, it's not an easy place to operate.
Thank you so much for putting that into context. Let me ask about China, because we wanted to get a sense of how this strategy advances our competition, if you will, or deals with, I should say, and handles the competition with Russia and China. Now, in April, the U.S. government announced $12 million in economic development aid to Greenland, and we know that China itself has really invested in the Arctic. In particular, there's growing investment and also interest impacting and shaping its actions. So what we'd like to know is how has this fit in and factored into the Air Force's Arctic strategy? What impact has what China's been doing impacted particularly the tenets and the underpinnings of the Air Force's Arctic strategy?
Well, I'll start with that response, and maybe my colleagues would have additions to it. But I would just say China is not an Arctic nation. by geography. But through its One Belt, One Road initiative, it has laid claim to an Arctic role and has become an observer to the Arctic Council, for instance. With the resources that have been discovered or projected in the Arctic region, there's clearly an interest on China's part to participate in those. The United States is welcoming of open and free use of the commons, that common domain of the Arctic, but we have to be prepared to defend our interests and those of our allies in that region. So we are perfectly prepared to accept fair and benevolent action there and having China as a participant, but we will be attentive to overreaching as a topic of concern to us.
And if I could offer to Ambassador that while strategies are incredibly important, and we really appreciate your giving us the opportunity to roll this out with the Atlantic Council, it's people and leaders that truly make a difference and bring a life to a strategy. And we are in a unique point in history where the current Secretary of the Air Force is the former ambassador to Finland, an Arctic nation, and the Secretary of the Navy is the former ambassador to Norway, an Arctic nation, and a Secretary of the Air Force that trained to be an astronaut, who understands space operations, who trained in Russia. I don't know if we'll have this moment in history again. So this is an opportunity for leadership in this critical region with a level of understanding across departments and across the interagency that I'm not sure we normally enjoy.
Thanks, Chief.
Let's,
Chief on space.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll add just a couple thoughts. China has really gone from 0 to 60 in space very quickly, and they are developing a robust set of capabilities for their own use to provide them the same advantage that we've enjoyed over the years by integrating space capabilities in our operations. And they're also developing a robust set of capabilities that threaten our access to space. In the Arctic, at both Clear Air Force Station and in Thule Air Base, those missile warning radars also provide space domain awareness for us, understanding what's going on in that domain. And we are going to continue to invest and modernize those capabilities to make sure that we have a really good understanding of the capabilities that are being launched and operated in that domain. And the Arctic provides us a great area to do that with.
all right, thank you for that. Let me follow on. General Goldfein, you had mentioned the new Secretary of the Navy was the U.S. Ambassador to Norway. So that also begs the question, separate from that connection, how does the Air Force strategy, how does it connect to the Navy and also what the Coast Guard, what they're doing up in the Arctic? They certainly have their particular domain. Could you shed light on that for us?
Yes, I'd be happy to. The Department of Defense does its very best work when we operate as a joint team. And so while this is an Air Force, Department of the Air Force strategy, it is completely nested with and must stay nested with the Coast Guard that's very heavily operating in the Arctic, with the Navy and with the Army and with the Marine Corps. And so we have a concept of operations that we're working through right now as Joint Chiefs, that Chief Raymond and I are working through, called Joint All-Domain Operations. And the whole idea here is it's a technological approach, but it really at the end feeds a leadership approach to joint operations across the spectrum, from peacetime and competition all the way to open warfare. And no one domain is going to be dominant in that operation. The whole idea is to connect this team so that we can bring to bear military capabilities from air, from space, from surface, from subsurface, manned, unmanned, all of the above. And in the end of the day, the purpose is to arm our diplomats to negotiate to a better peace, to a better place for the United States and our allies and partners. So you should find no error between what we are talking about in the Department of the Air Force, what the Secretary of the Navy, Secretary of the Army, my fellow chiefs should be talking about, because we are committed to doing what we do best, which is to operate jointly.
All right. Well, thank you for that. I just have a few more questions, and then I want to go because we have a robust audience today online, and we have a number of questions that also I know you want to take on. But let me just ask a few more. Madam Secretary, in your opening remarks, you had mentioned the importance of the collaboration and cooperation with our allies. And on that very issue, can you speak to how the department's strategy builds on the very common threads of activity and operations to improve cooperation and coordination with the allies? You mentioned it specifically, but dive a little bit deeper on this. It's an important area, and it's one that you highlighted. We'd like to hear a little bit more about that.
You know, only through cooperation with our allies will we be strong in Arctic or any other location in the globe. Working with allies and partners, when we think about our allies, the United States has long cooperated with Canada, and Canada is an Arctic nation of the greatest import. So we have worked with them on strategic warning and missile defense, and they have been big partners to us through their cooperation with NORAD. Canada has been an ally of the highest order and a partner on so many things. My personal experience in Finland, another Arctic nation, where they are not members of NATO, but they're partners with NATO. We want them to be able to be interoperable with our military equipment. We like for them to be able to mid-air refuel using our mid-air refuelers. We work with Denmark, another Arctic nation, by virtue of their leadership as owners of Greenland, their work in Greenland. At Thule in Greenland and in other places in Greenland, the United States Air Force and Space Force are very active in providing additional defenses and situational awareness. The other countries as well. We work closely with each of the other countries that are Arctic nations, and we work really to enhance and preserve the peace and to deter anyone from derogatory action.
And let me just add on to that. What is the role for NATO? I know that Secretary General Stoltenberg certainly has placed a priority on this issue. And then even, I believe, the Arctic was highlighted in the Atlantic Command. There's even been some discussion about even establishing an Arctic Command. Would you like to comment on that, or Madam Secretary, or the generals?
General Raymond or General Goldfein?
I'll jump in. On the allied piece, in the space domain, historically, we really haven't had to worry about having partners, because the domain was a benign domain, it was peaceful, and as long as you could launch a satellite into orbit and it survive launch, you were good. That's not the case today with the warfighting domain that we find ourselves in, and we are working very hard to collaborate with partners. As the Secretary mentioned with Canada, Canada actually helps us operate and mans the radar up at Thule, Greenland. They're on our ops floors and critical partners with us in operating that capability and helping us provide the domain awareness. With the changing strategic environment in the Arctic, and more operations occurring in the Arctic, you then have to put satellites in purpose-built orbits to be able to provide the coverage over that part of the poles. And what we have done here collectively over the past, little over the past year, we've developed a partnership with Norway, an Arctic partner, and we have a requirement to put 2 communication satellites in an orbit that would help cover the Arctic region. Norway was going to launch 2 satellites already. So rather than build our own satellites, we took communication payloads and are going to integrate those onto the Norwegian satellites. That will save significant costs for the United States, will allow us to get capabilities onto orbit quicker, and allows us to help deepen an already strong partnership with Norway and others in the region.
And maybe I just offer on NATO question. Chief Raymond and I actually just sat through a session with the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, General Wolters, yesterday, talking about his strategy in the region. NATO plays an incredibly important role because one of the strategic assets that we bring, and I would offer that perhaps our greatest strategic advantage is that we have allies and partners who align with us based on common interests. And, Chief Raymond and I like to joke or to say that, as we wear our uniforms, we ride for the brand. And our brand is the winning narrative. It's been the winning narrative over history. We stand for the rights of free people to be able to operate openly, for free trade, all of the things that Secretary Barrett laid out in the strategy. NATO has an incredibly important role. I would never speak for General Walters in terms of how he is going to organize his command, but I can tell you that he is focused on the Arctic, and NATO is looking at the Arctic as an area of increasing strategic importance.
And I couldn't agree more, Chief. And to piggyback on that, NATO is also looking as it relates to space. They've just over the course of the last year just designated space as an operational domain. We actually have gone to NATO, had dialogues with the military committee there about space. Not only do you then get the partnerships of the formal NATO partners, but they also have broad partnerships with others. And we think NATO is going to play an incredibly important role, including with the Arctic partners there, to help us operate successfully in that domain.
As you can imagine, the Atlantic Council attaches great importance to NATO, and so your responses mean a great deal. I have, as I said, let me go to one last question I have, and I want to go to questions that are coming in from our really vast audience online. On the operating environment in the Arctic, how does the Air Force view the challenges that are presented by the melting of the ice and also the Arctic terrain? You've described it. Of course, it's very tough. But what's the impact on the issue of its installations and operations in the region? How did that inform your planning? I'm sure that had to be a key element here.
I'll be happy to give you a few thoughts on that. We operate Thule Air Base, Greenland, well north of the Arctic Circle. It's dark half the year, light half the year, and very cold half the year. What has changed though is with the thawing and the melting of the permafrost, it can have significant challenges on our infrastructure. It can cause foundations of buildings and equipment to shift. It can impact the structural integrity of those facilities. It can, for example, cause increased runway maintenance, the runway that we operate up there. It also is providing more tourism in that area. We're seeing cruise ships come in, dock in the bay, let passengers off, which is also putting an increased demand on search and rescue capabilities and medical capabilities that we have there to be able to take care of those folks that typically wouldn't be in that region because it was covered with ice. But on the infrastructure side, it is a real challenge to keep the infrastructure up and running in the Arctic to begin with. But as the environment changes, it's becoming even more important, more difficult because of the permafrost issues that we're facing that provide the foundation for the facilities that we operate.
And Ambassador, I'd just offer quickly that we're a land-based Air Force. And so we operate off of land and we operate off of our bases. If General Terrence O'Shaughnessy was sitting here as the commander of NORTHCOM NORAD, he would tell you that access-basing overflight is one of his primary concerns as the commander who's entrusted with defending the homeland. And so anything environmentally that challenges us from not only the bases that we currently operate from, but the bases that we might have to operate from, should it come to defending the homeland, are an area that we pay particular attention to.
All right. Thank you for that. Let's go to a question that's from General Howie Chandler, U.S. Air Force retired. Thank you so much, General Chandler. And the question is, given the objectives of the strategy, what thought has been given to the recapitalization and expansion of the LC-130 fleet and sole ownership of the fleet by the Air Force?
So that's great. Let me just define the terms, and then I think that would ask General Goldstein if he'll take a look, talk about it. The LC-130 is a ski-equipped aircraft, aircraft, short takeoff capable aircraft. And so the LC-130s have been pivotal to getting access to terrain that would otherwise be inaccessible. So the LC-130s are very important, and recapitalizing is a significant issue to us. And Joe Goldfein, you want to add to that?
It's great to hear General Chandler, one of my mentors, on the line. A couple things. First of all, the opportunity to highlight our Air National Guard and what they do as part of our Air Force. We are truly one Air Force, and quite frankly, you can't tell us apart. And General Chandler is one of the individuals who championed that, and he ought to get a lot of credit. So it's our Air National Guard that operates that airplane and operates that mission set. And so I don't see, as Chief of Staff of the Air Force, any reduction in the demand signal. And in fact, we'll see likely the demand go up to be able to have unlimited access to the Arctic region, which that aircraft is essential to. Our challenge, as General Chandler knows, as we talk about recapitalization, is recapitalizing a number of weapon systems and being able to look beyond platforms and start thinking more about networking capability. And we could certainly spend a lot of time in this session talking about that, but there's no better region than the Arctic to talk about not, what airplanes, what ships, what subs, what satellites, but what network do we need to build? And how do we tie together these platform sensors and weapons so we can operate seamlessly across the joint team? And the LC-130 and others will play into that strategy, but it's how we connect them on a highway that's far more important than the individual platforms themselves.
All right, thank you for that. Let's go to the next question. Will the strategy affect the division of responsibilities between the U.S. combatant commands? This came in from Havard Kleiberg, and forgive my pronunciation, Air Force Attaché at the Norwegian Embassy. I'm assuming it's the Norwegian Embassy in Washington, D.C.
The current Arctic strategy doesn't address any change in combatant command alignments, though I think what it will do is draw a greater spotlight on the needs in the Arctic that might result in changes, but that's not a part of the current Arctic strategy.
Yes, ma'am, and if I could build on that, we sometimes joke that, doggone it, our adversaries are not paying attention to our maps, So we built these beautiful maps that carve out portions of the world and assign them to combatant commanders, and that's not the way our potential adversaries think. And so we, the Joint Chiefs, have been spending a lot of time under Chairman Milley's leadership and Chairman Dunford before him, thinking about globally integrated operations that look beyond traditional borders. Not to the point where we're changing current combatant commander responsibilities, but more how we take supporting relationships and refine them for truly global operations that are seamless across all of the military departments as we operate. That's one of our military strengths that we bring to the table. And so you just need to know that we are not looking at global operations through the lens of finite walls between combatant commanders. We understand there are seams, and we are thinking through those seams.
And that's one of the reasons why we stood up a U.S. Space Command. The U.S. Space Command is a global command, and AOR in space doesn't have those lines on the map because it happens above the Earth's surface. And not only did we stand up the combatant command to get after the challenges that we're facing in space, but we've also got after this combatant command and establishing this combatant command to help further the thought behind this global integration, because we're global by nature.
By the way, thank you, General Raymond, for getting that space piece in there. You're very good about that. Let's go to the next questions. Will allies have a role to play outside of a NORAD context as they do in the Pentagon's Arctic strategy? This came in from Dr. Andrea Sharon, who's with the Center for Defense and Security Studies, Canada.
Absolutely. As I mentioned earlier, and Chief mentioned it earlier as well, that our partnerships are our strength. And we are eager to develop these partnerships to make sure that we can all operate in the space domain safely, that And it's a global challenge requiring global partnerships. So I absolutely, and if you look at one of the key tenets of the strategy, it's all about allies and partners. And so I think this is going to be a significant focus of this strategy going forward. And as we implement this strategy, we're going to place a premium on making sure that we can continue to develop those strong partnerships that have provided us and our partners such a great advantage.
All right, thank you for that. Let me go to the next one. The question is, or the statement first is, the strategy alluded to modernizations of infrastructure and technologies in the areas of space, missile warning, and communications. What kinds of changes in spending can we anticipate? And what are the Air Force's biggest spending priorities in the Arctic? This came in from Valerie Insignia, air warfare reporter at Defense News.
Want to address that?
Yeah, thanks, Valerie. Good to hear from you as well. So it won't surprise Valerie, because she's actually done a lot of writing on this, that we are focusing on the integration of capabilities. So missile warning, space capabilities, air capabilities, fifth generation, how you marry up fifth generation with fourth generation. It's more the case, as we look at the future of the warfare, that data will be the currency that we operate on. And it's access to data, it's manipulation of data at the speed of relevance, it's denying your adversary ability to have data, and perhaps most importantly in this region, it's sharing data with allies and partners. It's getting from no foreign to yes foreign. So our investment strategy that you've seen the Air Force bring forward, both in the 21 drill and now in the 22 drill, is focused on this integration of capabilities. We're focused on highways, not so much on trucks. And so how we get these highways built, how we build the networks that we can operate seamlessly on, is where you're going to see most of our investment.
Okay.
All right, let's go to the next one. The Secretary mentioned in her opening statement Russian offensive air assets in the Arctic. Beyond just air intercepts that the chief mentions, do you have more information on that air threat? And this came in from Jim Townsend, who's at the Center for a New American Security, and he's a former Pentagon official.
I want to speak to that.
One of the things that we've been thinking, it goes back to my opening comment, which is I consider Russia to be a professional Air Force. And I consider my counterpart to be a professional who's accountable and responsible, like I am, for the professional activity of his service. And given the fact that we are meeting more and more in the air and intercepting each other more and having more longer range sortie, it becomes even more important that we hold our airmen to a very high standard of professionalism, and we have common rules of behavior that we adhere to, just like we have for the last 50 years going forward. What we've seen in Russian air activity as we've watched them in Syria is increasing interactivity, increasing interoperability. And so it should not be surprising that a professional Air Force is continuing to advance, just as we, of course, are continuing to advance. And so the question becomes, as we both advance in our technical capabilities, how do we ensure that our professionalism stays as high, if not higher, and we use all of this technology to ensure that we cannot have a miscalculation or an unintended consequence as our diplomats continue to negotiate to a better place.
All right. And let's go to the next. I think, in fact, this one maybe is interrelated with that, but let's see if you'd like to add something further. This has come in from Professor Bertelsen from the Arctic University of Norway. He asked the question, how does the U.S. Air Force Arctic strategy contribute to strategic security with Russia? General, I think you were laying the foundation for that, but would you, or Madam Secretary, or General Raymond, would you like to add something to that piece?
I would just say quickly that one of the things that we need to do is to establish rules of the road in the Arctic This had been an area that was not frequented by trade as much as it is now. And as it grows in accessibility and greater human interaction and greater discovery and development of resources, it's going to be important for us to know what the rules are. And that's what we need to be, it's one of the things we'll hope to do in this strategy. Chief?
Chief, do you want to jump in? I would just offer that, in complex international relationships, it is actually, there have been times in our history, very recently, where we've been able to find areas of common interest in certain areas where we have no interest in other areas. An example I might use with Russia would be the time, and I'm Chief Raymond into your domain here, and you may want to pick up on this in terms of the operations we've continued, focused on science, research, and development in the International Space Station, while we have not found a lot of common interests, below the atmosphere. So above the atmosphere, find some common interest. Below the atmosphere, mostly an adversarial relationship. So the question is, are there areas of common interest we could find above the 66th parallel that perhaps we're not able to find below in the same way? That's the way complex international relationships work. I shouldn't even be saying this to two ambassadors that have lived this. But I do believe that if we're sophisticated in our dialogue with Russia, there has to be a few areas of common interest that we can find where we can be better together than we are separately.
All right. Thank you for that. Oh, sorry, General, did you want to add?
I would just build on what Joe Goldfein said. I think even in the height of the Cold War, there was partnerships in space. We think there's an opportunity there to build on that. One thing that's different, though, in what Joe Goldfein said in his previous answer about professional and safe conduct in a domain, space is a new warfighting domain, and we have to develop those safe and professional standards of how we operate, just like the Air Force does in the air domain and the Navy does in the maritime domain. We've got to build that same norms of behavior and what's safe and professional in space.
All right. We have about 6 minutes left before 1 minute to closing. And I want to get a few more questions because these are excellent questions coming in. How are we working in partnership with Denmark so we can help protect Greenland and the Arctic with forces and equipment, both US and Danish? This came in from Brigadier General Michelle Rose, Northcom.
We have a very strong partnership with Denmark, especially as it relates to the operation of Thule, Greenland. We have an organization in the embassy in Copenhagen. We partner with Denmark in the operation of that base. There are also Arctic forces of Denmark that are located in the region that we partner with up at Thule. So we have a very strong partnership, and really couldn't operate as effectively as we do today without that partnership.
All right. I hope you wouldn't mind if I go to the next question. I want to try to get in at least two more here. This came in from Amy McCullough with Air Force Magazine. She asked, what is the Department of the Air Force doing to ensure that airmen are prepared to operate in such a dangerous environment as the Arctic? How will Arctic training be incorporated into large exercises such as Red Flag? And will Arctic training be required for more airmen? If so, who?
Let me say quickly that there's a lot of training. Training is key to being able to operate in the Arctic. We need both our personnel and our materiel to be ready for the harsh environment of the Arctic. I happen to have with me a shrink-wrapped glove and a standard size glove. We have to figure out how do you put large resources into small compartments in our facilities in the Arctic. We work to train our people and to harden our resources, our facilities, and our equipment so that it can stand that harsh environment. We have to work to pass on that training and education, and we have to build things in hardened ways so that we can operate there. Chief, you probably have some great examples from that.
I'll just give you a couple of examples of just exercises that we participated in. Last year, we participated in Arctic Challenge. That was over 140 aircraft from 9 different nations, 4,000 participants, European exercise. We run 4 Red Flag Alaskas every year. That exercise is becoming more and more sophisticated. So short answer to your question, Amy, is I do see an increase in activity relative to building on this strategy to ensure that airmen are prepared to go anywhere globally as an expeditionary force. And what I tell them is I don't know exactly when I'm going to ask you, squadron commander, to pack up, and deploy forward to either 120 degrees plus or 50 degrees minus. I just know that we have from right now until then to get you ready.
Okay, that's great. I'm going to stick in one last. May I, General Raymond, was that right? Okay, thank you. The last one, and I'm sorry to all those who came in with questions. We had a substantial number of questions. Last one, just briefly, would you speak about the place of Indigenous people in the new Arctic strategy, and to what extent does it differ from or build on past approaches? That's from Mark Wiener, Rutgers Law School. Any comments on that one?
Well, the Indigenous peoples, it's no news to them, the coldness, the harsh environment. They've lived for millennia. They have been effective in that region. We have to have a cool school. We have a school where we teach people how to get along well in that environment. The Indigenous peoples know that process. They own the land. They have been cooperating. They are an especially adept people for, they are more than any other ethnic group. They volunteer to be a part of the United States military. So the Indigenous peoples are key to our ability to operate there and everywhere else in our military.
Let me say, because it's 2:30 and we promised to run on time, or it's actually 2:29. First, let me just give a hearty thank you. You know, not only the Atlantic Council, but I know every single person that's joined in today. To them, the Arctic region is critical to U.S. national security and homeland defense. And the Air Force's Arctic strategy is not only timely, but it's forward-looking. We have appreciated immensely your coming today and not only presenting the tenets of the strategy, but answering and touching upon the broad variety of issues that are so key here. Thank you so much. Well done, groundbreaking, and we look forward to your coming again. Thank you again, Madam Secretary and Generals. Well done.
Thank you, Paula.
Thank you.